And a bad morning to y'all. We are still in August for some reason. Time travel is not kicked in. We have not reached the singularity. CERN has not opened up a wormhole that has devoured space-time like a giant black hole of existence-eating terrible power yet. I just woke up 20 minutes ago, so this is the perfect timing for having a conversation about awful shit that happened while my fucking caffeine kicks in. We have good news on the bad news front. We have another host. His name is Minarchist Cookbook, Minarch Cookbook, I think, on Twitter. And you can find him at the Gaslight Hour podcast normally. But he's agreed to come on every day as a host because this time slot generally works for him. So we have another host to add to the mix and another perspective to add to the pile, because as I was discussing with somebody in DMs the other day, that's what I want. I want as many perspectives as possible, because that way we don't sound like propaganda. But essentially, we're going to get into the thing, and then we're going to get into that. But first, I want him to introduce himself before I get into the actual meat of the show. So let me get these sponsored announcements out of the way, and you can introduce yourself if I missed anything or if I misrepresented anything. So this is brought to you by Brave, the ad-resistant, tracker-resistant browsing experience. It's also brought to you by the Cash App, a dollar and Bitcoin wallet that you can use with a Visa card. And it's also brought to you by Liberty Mugs, mugs that you can use to consume fluid while also pissing off your coworkers and provoking terrible, terrible riots at the workplace. You know, whether you be a communist or a capitalist, you can find something there that will please you, especially since we've all been told at one point or another that we need to go to Somalia, and we need to, we hate roads. We use Bitcoin because we're just awful drug dealing scum. You can find something that will please you, unless you are a dirty statist, in which case I hope you watch this show, because we're going to convert you and make you shoot up your workplace. Anyway, Dexter or Minarchist Cookbook, why don't you let us know where you can be found, who you are, what you do, etc., and then we'll jump right into it.
Yeah, so I don't think you really misrepresent me at all. That is who I am. I'm most active on Twitter, where my handle is, in fact, Minarch Cookbook. I do have a new podcast project that's been going for a few weeks now, The Gaslight Hour. And as far as what I do, I don't do a whole lot. I've been trying to get more active in this sort of scene, trying to preach to the newly converted and to the still wrong-thinking masses.
Very cool. All right. Well, I think we should give you the you said in the admin chat you didn't want the first, so let's give that to Daniel, and we'll give the rest fucking thing. This is what happens when you don't get enough sleep the previous night to wake up much earlier and let your brain turn on. Anyway, you can do one of your pieces now, fucking looping it.
All right, no problem, mate. So we're kind of theming this around a little bit again on the tech front.
Like part 2.
Yeah, this is part 2. The things that can go wrong, as it were. So this ties into the GDPR discussion we had as well. Google risks mega fine in EU over location, quote, stalking. First big test for GDPR looms. Special report by Andrew Orlowski on the 16th of August, 2018. Privacy campaigners say Google's obsessive collection of location markers violates Europe's privacy laws, potentially exposing the California giant to punitive fines. Several privacy watchers agree that, as it stands, users are misled and can't give informed consent. That exposes the company to financial penalty under GDPR rules, which could be 2% or 4% of turnover. Burying its stalking settings while distracting users with deliberately crippled location history button isn't just deceitful, it's unlawful. Campaigner Phil Booth opined. Without proper consent or legitimate purpose, Google is breaching the GDPR rights of every EU citizen it has been tracking. Under GDPR, such location data associated with a Google account is clearly personal data, breach of which could expose Google to a giant fine. The question is, will regulators act on this globalized prowling? Even before GDP... Sorry, go on.
Well, now, like, just before anybody screams statism, my general response to this is that Google has been heavily funded by Keyhole to create technology that the government now uses to spy on us relatively actively, known as Google Earth. You know, as still shots, they get much more active feeds from the sky. Let me put it to you that way. And it's something that they've rubbed in our face with an end user version of it that seems much nicer. But to be completely straight, it is not that friendly. It is not that light, and it is not that surface level. What it is it's a terrible intrusive piece of technology that allows them to use satellites to spy on daily activities. So fuck Google, and I don't care what happens to them. If it was an institution that was not connected to the government in any way, I would say that, yeah, I would care that they were being attacked by new regulations, because it's, you know, not the government that grants rights. It's not the government that can protect citizens' rights based on new information and new bills that have been signed, because government doesn't give us our rights. If rights exist at all, they're negative, and they come from the endemic nature of being a being who understands limits and boundaries and is willing to respect them. Otherwise, rights are meaningless, and they're just privileges that government can give and take away. So I'm not like saying, you know, just if you're pissed off at somebody, go sue them. What I am saying is that if they're one of the government institutions that, or one of the government assisting institutions that's dramatically helped them doing what they do, yeah, fucking sue them. The government fighting the government is not only hilarious and profitable, but it's also fucking good.
It is good. I make another argument. Technically, this is fraud, what Google is doing. Because in essence, users have a form of currency that nobody really pays attention to that much, and it's called data. And that makes a lot of money for a lot of companies. Using data means that you can have more accurate advertising, which means your sales will be higher, which means you will get more money, and more people will want to spend on your website or through your services. It's a simple matter of economics. However, with GDPR, they just slightly changed the rules, making it a requirement to opt into that. So it's basically informed consent principles now, same as you would have under any normal contract. The contract is, you give us data, we give you services. If you deny that data, some of those services will be reduced. I don't have a problem with that. If I'm not using Maps, I don't have my location on. If I'm not using another app, I make sure that a load of things are basically disabled within my phone. And I pick my phone specifically to make sure that's possible. But under GDPR, or even before GDPR, I mean, in the article, even before GDPR, the EU's privacy, quote, wise man, the Article 29 Working Group, now the European Data Protection Board, regarded location data as particularly sensitive. And that is perfectly logical. You have location data and sexual orientation data. You can sell that data to a government in Africa and completely ruin the lives of loads of people out there. The same thing's true for people in Texas. I mean, there's a reason why gay rights advocacy groups advocate for privacy with regards to sexual orientation. They don't want people to be tracked based on that, simply because it's nobody's fucking business. And that kind of thing, it has to be managed by each individual company and auditing firms and all sorts of stuff. And this is why the complexity of advertising is so deep. But GDPR has sort of created this level of everything is now protected data, especially location data. And they'd have been sued before in any case without GDPR being in place. But since they've made these changes, they've created an obfuscation layer. They are committing a form of fraud, misinforming their users and saying, here's your location history. If you want to disable us tracking your location, disable this. But they're not telling you that, oh, and also you need to disable this, and this, and basically it renders any Google product effectively useless once you get down to it, because you've had to disable practically everything just to turn location off.
Well, but that's just the result of using centralized tech to begin with. We were discussing this briefly before coming on. Android itself is sort of a botnet. Like, it's not Linux based, it's fucking its own like OS, and it uses very specifically things that can be manipulated from another source, because that's how they automatically update with all the shiny new features to keep people distracted from the fact that they're carrying a wiretap on their person. So I mean, realistically speaking, if you want to get rid of that like kind of thing, you need your own device. You need your own device with your own OS and your own encryption, or you're trusting a third party anyway with your data. And in doing so, you're asking for things like this to happen. I don't mean to sound like, what was she wearing, but specifically, she was wearing a big sign that said "rape me," and so like, it's not. What? No, I mean, she look at the terms and conditions, man. At the very least, you're saying to them that the government can turn on your phone at any time. So, I mean, it's whenever you accept these terms and conditions, you're accepting a huge botnet because you're talking to an institution like Alphabet.
You're not wrong, Jeremiah. That's exactly it. And man, if it isn't a punch in the gut every time a person has to think about it, too.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not gonna deny there is personal responsibility for using these tools and programs, and there are means to turn off these features. They do exist, and that is all Google is technically required to provide under the law, the means to do this. However, since GDPR came out, that has really shifted, and the idea that you own your data to begin with is a valid concept. It's
100%, absolutely.
It's a valid concept, but if you own your data but you don't act like it, it's sort of like leaving your gate unlocked where there's a lock, or leaving your door unlocked where there's a lock, or various other things. It's sort of like you have a full-on surveillance system, but you turn it off before you leave. So
I'd say that's a bit harsh, but I get what your meaning is. It's like having.
I don't think it's harsh.
Like saying your house is in the middle of Central Park rather than in a building with a locked door.
I mean, more than a little, but I just the whole thing. It strikes me as people, and this is one of my normal complaints about civilization as a whole, is that people aren't responsible. They don't fuck responsibly. They don't eat responsibly. They don't travel responsibly. They don't, make the mechanizations on which society functions responsibly, and they certainly don't accept terms and conditions responsibly. They don't fucking read them. So as a result, they accept a huge amount of terms and conditions, whereby this might not actually even be fraud. They might tell you that, there are various things you have to disable in order to get there, and they might bury them, quote, but only after they've already buried them under a layer you've already accepted. And, they say, please read these and don't click accept until you do. And you're just like, meh, I'm going to hit this big ass blue button.
Before now, I'd have said you're absolutely 100% right, because the law before now was basically geared to protect the companies from legal action on behalf of the users, while at the same time giving a means to provide some modicum of consent for tracking and data collection. However, now that it's an opt-in, it becomes a massive ball ache, basically, for any company.
Yeah,
And
but are we
Google, I
talking
think,
about fraud in an active sense, or are we talking about legal fraud? Because, like we said at like I think you agreed to, um, it's not, you know, it's not the government that grants rights. It's not the government that can take them away, and it's
oh
not
yeah,
like they're
obviously.
protecting, and it's not like they're protecting a brand new one. And if you really want your data protected, then you should read what the parties you're contracting with are going to do with it.
Agreed. I'm not saying that there isn't responsibility for reading the terms and conditions when you're trying to keep your data protected. And if you're not concerned about a given company having your data, then that's your choice, that's your prerogative. If, however, they do something that causes you to have concerns, you must have a way of rectifying that in within the terms of the contract at least, because this is the way you're paying the company. This is the exchange that you provide them. And if you
Among
disagree
other
with that
things.
exchange, you have to be able to terminate your account. Well, all those companies provide a means of termination. And you have to be able to provide a way to either limit or modify that data if they've got it wrong. So if somebody's saying you're someone completely different from who you are, you should be able to then modify that to make it clear as to who you are so that nobody is misrepresenting you in any way, shape, or form. Because technically, that could be considered a form of libel, especially if they
Okay,
start doing any kind of tracking on political beliefs, which in some, again, that's considered now, well, that's always really been considered in Europe sensitive data because you can be discriminated against for your political party very easily on a number of different levels. But they still want to be able to find a way of tracking. A lot of people still want to be able to find a way of tracking it.
yeah, okay, but what we're talking about here is whether or not there should be action taken here. And you do own your data just like you own your car, but if
Mm.
you let somebody else drive your car and they're drunk, don't be surprised if it ends up hitting a pole. That's what I'm saying. Like, you
Yes,
own
but
it.
that's not
You
the
own it. You
end.
own it. You own it. But that doesn't mean that you're not liable for those with whom you contract about it. Like, it doesn't mean that since you own your data, which yes you do, you can't then not even own it by giving it to somebody. Like, and
I'm not
to
quite
be
sure what you
completely
mean by that. That didn't
by
quite come out
giving it
right.
to Google. No, it came out perfectly. If you gave it to somebody, you gave it to that person to do with what they please. And Google's very
No,
transparent about their data. Yes. And Google's very transparent about what they do with your data.
strictly speaking, that isn't you can't they can't just do with it as they please. They can do with it as
Legally,
defined
we were talking
within the
about
terms
data.
of a contract. You can
Uh, uh,
define, and if this was if we were talking a formal contract situation, no state involved, yada yada, it would be defined in the contract what they would do with
right.
it, and you would have to
But
agree to
they
that.
do that, and they
I
did
mean,
it, and it's not like they didn't. It was just buried. They had the article you read admitted it was buried, obfuscated. It was there,
obfusca-
but it was
obfuscation is
buried.
considered in a lot of cases of tort law a form of fraud, as
It's
I
not a form
understand
of
it.
it's not a form of fraud ethically, though. I mean, if you just don't read the terms and conditions well enough to realize that you're doing something and you sign a contract, it doesn't mean that you're not then liable for that contract. And informed consent, I recognize as a necessity in a free society, but that doesn't mean that that informed consent then also needs to be like holding your hand through the process. They inform you that there are these terms and conditions, and then they spell it out and say all of the things that they're going to be accessing at all times, and they tell you those things. These things have been made clear, as far as I'm aware, in both the terms and conditions and in the warnings that they give you when you install applications on your devices or when
That
you
is
install the
true.
firmware for the Android OS.
But all of that has come about ever since the EU came out with its regulations on where they were going to take the internet. That's the
Well,
only
no, I mean,
reason you have those options at the moment is
no,
because
they've
it
been
was
saying that they do
forced.
this for a while.
Yeah, that's the point. I'm not talking about since GDPR became legal. GDPR has been known about by the advertising industry for 2, maybe 3 or 4 years. It's been on the
Right.
cards for ages.
But
and
they've
Google
been
has
doing
been
this
on
for a
the
long time.
yeah, they finished their data platform for management purposes to the full extent of GDPR, they thought, about a year and a half ago, but they've been working on it for about 4 years. But that's the point. It's been around, and it's only around because the EU basically was pushing towards this user opt-in strategy rather than opt-out. Google saw the logic of what was going to happen as a result of that and went, okay, well, you're going to need this, and this to manage all of this stuff. So we got to build all of this. That took about 3 years, and then they had a year. They were a year in advance of everybody else of the law, and they still didn't get it right.
I'm still not seeing how this is fraud in an ethical context. I'm seeing how the GDPR, with its new fake rights that they give people, essentially to not be concerned with how their data is used, and you know, to randomly sign contracts and then later cry about it to the government. You know, I can see from that perspective that this is a new sort of fraud. But in terms of ethics, it's a really, really old form of not fraud. And it's not fraud because they're not being fraudsters. They're not saying we don't do this and then doing it, or, you know, packaging it in and not telling you that they packaged it in. They're packaging it in, telling you they packaged it in, and then people just didn't know about it because they thought they did something else and they didn't understand the technology well enough. That's on the end user level, and it's a problem that isn't going to stop because of the GDPR or because Google gets sued because of this. It just means that if they do want to commit fraud, they're going to have to be more secretive about it. And then just keep in mind that Google is a multi-billion-dollar corporation who will face no jail time or any sort of actual punishment. Yeah. So it's not like this means jack shit, even if it's considered fraud legally, even if it's not fraud ethically, even if all of blah blah. They're not going to see any actual consequences from it. And either way, it's not fraud, not ethically. Not in my opinion.
The consequences of it are actually proportional in this instance. So it's a percentage of your revenues, I think, was the either that or a percentage of profit. I'm not certain which. I need to look up what that terminology was from the article. But it is basically somewhere like 2 to 4% of your profits per month would be garnered as fines until the issue is resolved. So if they don't fix the problem, they just constantly hemorrhage part of their profit margin, and or part of their revenue margin, part of their revenue quotient, which could be even worse.
I think that is significant. Back to Jeremiah's earlier point, though, about Google and these other major corporations being collaborators, though. You know, that fine means absolutely nothing. You know, take that out of their handout. You know,
I think that's a good segue, actually, Dexter, because you brought up something from Blacklisted News that goes into this.
Yeah, it's tangentially connected for certain. If you gentlemen would like to move on here,
I think it's worth it because we will quite happily debate for a whole hour on a given subject and probably never come to a full consensus because both of us are contrarians.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
So it's probably good that we have a third person pulling us both out of the weeds and back onto topic.
Well, and also, of course, like as soon as we get, you know, more interested people, it's going to get very, very hectic in here, and there's going to be countless shows that are going to be on this network. I think that this network has the potential to really fuck up like the entire world's days, and that's what I want.
Be interesting.
Like, you know, it's morning somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
But yeah, please bring up the bit for Alex.
Alex, our good friend Alex Jones. So this news broke late yesterday afternoon, and I'm sourcing the information here from an article posted to blacklistednews.com just this morning. Alex Jones' flagship radio station shut down by Federal Communications Commission. That's the FCC, if the initials sound familiar. And our article tells us the U.S. communications regulator has shut down Alex Jones' flagship radio station and slapped it with a $15,000 fine. The news comes after the controversial commentator was banned from a range of social media outlets. A lawsuit filed in the U.S. District Court in Austin this week accuses Liberty Radio of operating without federal consent since at least 2013, the Austin American-Statesman reports. Now, the Austin-based station has been solely streaming online anyways since December, when it was knocked off air. The newspaper reported that religious programming has replaced it on the 90.1 FM frequency. Let's see. Jones' website InfoWars was banned from Facebook, YouTube, Apple, Spotify last week. We all know that already. And that's the gist of the article there. I don't know where we want to go in terms of commentary on this. Personally, I'm of a very split mind on Alex Jones anyways. But at the same time, I think the easy conclusions to draw away here are federal consent. Holy shit, what a load of crap that concept even is. Why does anyone have jurisdiction over how you can wiggle sound waves? But
yeah, I think Eminem said it best. The FCC won't let me be or let me be me.
Exactly. The FCC is, there's a lot of disgusting, horrible facets of the United States government, and we could go on and on and on about it, and I'm sure we will, but nothing makes me crankier than this kind of bullshit. I don't know a lot about the technical side of it, but I do have a passion for radio, and especially talk radio. So to see it so ham-handedly managed by the government just infuriates me.
Well, so there's something to the idea of having regulated sound waves, and they're not just sound waves, by the way, they're radio waves.
Radio waves.
I think
absolutely.
But there's something to that, because if you have overlapping signals, it can fuck up somebody else's ability to run their radio business. Alex Jones's didn't do that, but to be completely frank, he's not a goddamn anarchist. So I care in a very limited sense about it, because he's getting regulated. He wanted Trump, who is a Republican, and Republicans have regularly gone to bat for the FCC. So I have limited capacity for caring here, but obviously I think that people should be able to, as long as they don't step on somebody else's signal, they should be able to have whatever signal they want. That being said, I think that there would have to be some way to either run the signals differently, so that nobody stepped on each other's toes voluntarily in terms of how the signal was spread, or, and this is the other option, we switch to the internet where people can get specific signals they want. And that's the future of radio, I think. I think the real truth is that radio is a dinosaur medium, and that now that we have the internet, and we have a different sort of radio waves, because it's still radio waves.
Yes, technically speaking, it's still the same.
Yeah, but we can get
bandwidth, I guess.
Well, it's going to be the same bandwidth, pretty much. It's just audio, not video.
Right.
No, I mean, what I'm saying is it's not the same bandwidth. I mean, what it is it's the same signal transmission and receiving devices. And that's the thing people don't get, that it's all still just the same waves. It's just transmitted and received in different ways. It's not designed to be immediately converted to sound. It's designed to be immediately converted to data. And in doing so, basically they've moved from the ancient technology of radio waves, which is ancient at this point because of accelerationism, to a new technology of radio, of direct radio communication. And that means that as long as you're within reach of a wireless network, you can reach the signal anyway. And that's what people need to realize is that if you really want this pirate radio to work, you need to build neighborhood mesh nets, and you need to operate them militantly. You need to be able to defend them from the government. But Jones isn't going to do that. He's just going to roll over and play good boy because he's Jones, and he's not an anarchist, and he's not actually here for any revolution. And he went immediately, and he went back to sucking Trump cock after Trump made him cry and break up with him on air.
Sure, and that's my biggest problem. Like I said, I'm of two minds on Alex himself. He's not someone that I go to bat for on a regular basis. The reason I brought this up, though, the reason I think it's significant is because, like I pointed out immediately, the existence of the FCC is an absolute farce because of its governmental authority. And, you know, he is a popular figure. It is newsworthy when something like this happens to a person like him.
Oh, yes, definitely. And it's important to recognize what has happened, because he has basically been deplatformed thanks to a large amount of, well, effectively media activism is about the best way of putting it. The mainstream and
manufactured social pressure is what it is.
Yes, it's manufactured social pressure being levied at somebody who I have always considered to be controlled opposition. So I find it quite unusual that now that he's, or now that the opposition is basically in charge of everything, that the mainstream media feels the need to shut down so hard on Alex Jones. So the only thing I can suspect is that they've basically just gone, right, enough is enough. We need to censor as much of everything as we can. And this is the biggest channel that's contradicting our main platforms. We can still utilize Fox News to be a form of controlled opposition a lot better than we can utilize Alex Jones.
Absolutely. Though
I
would say that
live wire.
InfoWars itself, too, though, in my mind, seems to be some sort of, quote, controlled opposition, unquote. You know, I don't think they're any less of a collaborator than most other news networks. But what really separates them as a platform is the fact that he's able to command so much attention with his shtick, with the way he goes about it.
Yeah, I mean, the main thing for me, though, is with Jones, as a result of all of this, we now have a situation that I've not actually seen in my lifetime, which is a definitive example of the need to use the Sherman Antitrust Act. And this is for me, this is a very ethical law. It's to prevent companies from being able to collude with each other to manipulate the entirety of the market and censure any major competition. From a statistical standpoint, Jones is the major competition to all of these news networks. He is huge in comparison from an online viewership perspective to most of these people. And as a result, well, it's a bit tricky, really, if I'm honest, to say how I feel about it. I think the companies that basically went lockstep on him straight away need to be put under review for collusion. I don't know which branch it is that controls this. It's probably something like the SEC that currently has jurisdiction over most of that. But the problem is that it's things have become so conglomerated now. You've got let's look at media, ISPs, and big tech companies, just for a quick second. Media, you've got, 5 entities, some of which own the ISPs themselves and are basically 2 markets in one. So you've got big media providers and also the pipes. They're providing both at the same time. This kind of activity, and then using the FCC, for example, to shut down the radio station itself, that's smacking of being able to have public influence as well on a major entity. Because unless there's a legitimate violation of the law, they can't just shut them down and give them a fine for no apparent reason. They have to provide a legitimate cause because they are the government, and they have to give a reason for it.
That's where the horse shit that is federal consent comes back in, because supposedly the radio station had been operating on an expired permit for the last couple of years, but again, that is such a load of crap. Anyways, that's the end point of that argument. You know, the government did give justification for doing it, but like everything that the state does, it was just a crock, you know?
Right. Well, so I think, and I think that that's a good way to transition into the next part of this, which I think should be, let me see, what was that piece? Fucking, yeah, there we go. Deep fakes. Let's go into deep fakes.
Oh man,
let's go into deep fakes a little bit, and then let's also immediately after that talk about that purge, and try to keep each under 5 minutes. And then after we talk about those things, I'll go into something that I wanted to bring up yesterday, which is essentially my haha LOL nerds go outside comment. Because it's effectively technology is literally causing blindness. Let me just top it all off with that.
All right. Well, let's hit up the deep fakes issue. And I wasn't familiar with this until I really read this article. I mean, I kind of knew the concept, but I didn't know it had its own name.
And just what they're capable. You know what? I'll let you talk here. I'll reserve that comment for once we get through the article.
Fair enough. I'll be as quick as I can. So, there is no tech solution to deepfakes, is the title of the article by Samantha Cole. Funding technological solutions algorithmically generated fake videos only puts a bandage on a deeper issue of consent and media literacy. Every day, Google Alert sends me an email rounding up all the recent articles that mention the keyword deepfake. The stories oscillate between suggesting deepfakes could trigger war and covering Hollywood's latest quirky use of face swapping technology. It's a media whiplash that fits right in with the rest of 2018, but this coverage frequently misses what we should actually fear most: a culture where people are fooled en masse into believing something that isn't real, reinforced by a video of something that never happened. In the 9 months since Motherboard found a guy going by the username Deepfakes posting face-swapped, algorithmically generated porn on Reddit, the rest of the world rushed straight in for the literal nuclear option. If nerds on the internet can create fake videos of Gal Gadot having sex, then they can also create videos of Barack Obama, Donald Trump, and Kim Jong-un that will somehow lead to an international incident that leads to nuclear war. The political implications of fake videos are so potentially dangerous that the US government is funding research to automatically detect them. In April, the US Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, or aka DARPA, Media Forensic Department, awarded nonprofit research group SRI International 3 contracts to find ways to automatically detect video manipulations. Researchers at the University of Albany received funding from DARPA to study deepfakes and found that analyzing the blinks in videos could be one way to detect a deepfake from an unaltered video. The worry that deepfakes could one day cause a nuclear war is a tantalizing worst-case scenario, but it skips right past the current and pressing issues of consent, media literacy, bodily autonomy, and ownerships of one's own digital self. Those issues are not far-fetched or theoretical. They are exacerbated by deepfakes today. Will someone make a fake video of President Donald Trump declaring war against North Korea and get us all killed? Maybe. But the end of humanity is the most extreme end result, and getting more attention than issues around respecting women's bodies or assessing why people creating deepfakes felt entitled to use their images without permission to begin with. Until we grapple with these deeply entrenched societal issues, DARPA's technology solutions are a bandage at best, and there's no guarantee that they will work anyway. And there's a very long description on how they do deep fakes and what's going on with it, and and they even basically make a quick mention to QAnon, saying that if people believe that, then there's really no need for deep fakes anyway. Which seems a little harsh, but hey, this is Vice we're talking about. So it's not surprising that they'd throw that in, but that was basically the main thrust of the article in any case. And well, conceptually, using it, this is basically video fraud. There's no other way around it. Using false data to convince people something happened that didn't. If there isn't a better definition of fraud, I don't know what is. What there is.
Yeah, you're completely right about that. It is certainly fraud. But the thing that gets me the most worked up here isn't even the idea that it could lead to warfare like they're talking about as the worst possible outcome of this. What really gets me worked up is the implications for propaganda. You know, democracy has always been a way of farming false legitimacy for the state. And with tools like this in state hands and so many idiot normies out there in the world, we've officially reached a point where the state can literally just produce one of these videos of, say, someone running against an incumbent candidate, or of the bad guys across the ocean, or of whatever minorities being persecuted on a given day. And people out there all across whatever nation you're in are going to believe it. You know, the genie is out of the bottle. This is the perfect propaganda weapon until you can find a way to demonstrate to millions of individuals how to detect it.
There are like YouTube websites that do little blurbs on how to detect what is and isn't a fake video, why it's fake, technically, why it doesn't work technically, why it can never work technically, and the rest of it. And then basically describe show what is actually being done and how the footage is being edited to make it appear something that is impossible to have happened, didn't actually happen, and somebody just played around with the footage using CGI or some other features. And
sure, but the technology to do this is always going to keep improving, though. You know, because these early phases of it are pretty susceptible to detection, doesn't mean they always will be, or doesn't mean even per se that they actually are. You know, you have to consider the possibility that we are actively being fooled by higher quality ones already.
Oh yeah, there's no denying that there is that possibility, and it's the kind of thing. This is the kind of thing that it's even worse than basically censorship, because it's when censorship fails, you have to manufacture data and do it in a way that makes what you're trying to censor completely discredited and make what you're saying inviolate. Deep fakes have that potential, and they are a terrifying little concept, to be honest.
Yeah, well,
it's absolutely horrifying.
And not to mention the fact that, you know, on that level, even if you weren't just trying to censor somebody, even if you were just trying to get away with a crime, for instance, let's just go war crime. You could make it seem like there were terrorists in a place that there weren't, if this gets complicated enough. You could make it seem like a guy murdered somebody when he didn't, if this got complicated enough. You could do fucking whatever. And you know,
that's exactly why I'm saying it's such a potent propaganda weapon.
Right.
It's going to be impossible to prove who bad guys are.
And my conspiracy mind claims that this is already happening, but I can't just say that on air, but, you know, whatever, fucking thing.
Well,
a reasonable mind would be suspicious, and I think we can say that.
I think it is reasonable to be concerned about all of this. And here's what, I mean, this is originally from Liberty Blitzkrieg, but I saw this on Zero Hedge as well, and it's a core feature of this. Censorship is what happens when powerful people get scared, by Michael Krieger. There's a quote he pulls out: "Only the weak hit the fly with a hammer." Anyone who tells you that the recent escalation of censorship by US tech giants is merely a reflection of private companies making independent decisions is either lying or dangerously ignorant. In the case of Facebook, the road from pseudo-platform to willing and enthusiastic tool of the establishment power players is fairly straightforward. It really got going earlier this year when issues surrounding egregious privacy violations in the case of Cambridge Analytica, stuff that had been going on for years, and yes, it had, many companies did it, could finally be linked to the Trump campaign. It was at this point that powerful and nefarious forces spotted an opportunity to leverage the company's gigantic influence and disturbing news and opinion for their own ends. Rather than hold executives to account and break up the company, the choice was made to commandeer and weaponize the platform. This is where we stand today. Let's not whitewash history, though. These tech companies have been compliant, out-of-control government snitches for a long time. Thanks to Edward Snowden, we are aware of the deep and long-standing cooperation between these lackeys and the U.S. intelligence agencies in the realm of mass surveillance. As such, the most recent transformation of these companies into fully fledged information gatekeepers should be seen in its proper context, merely as a dangerous continuation and expansion of an already entrenched reality. But it's all out in the open now. Facebook isn't even hiding the fact it's outsourcing most of its fake news analysis to the Atlantic Council, a think tank funded by NATO, Gulf states, and defense contractors. Let's quickly highlight that Gulf states, because that may be a key reason why a large portion of the news has to be modulated to make Islam seem less aggressive than it is in the West in particular. But I digress. As reported by Reuters, Facebook began looking for outside help amid criticism for failing to rein in Russian propaganda ahead of the 2016 presidential elections. With scores of its own cybersecurity professionals and $40 billion in annual revenue in 2017, Facebook might not seem in need of outside help. It doesn't need outside help, it needs political cover, which is the real driver behind this. But the lab and the Atlantic Council bring geopolitical expertise and allow Facebook to distance itself from sensitive pronouncements. On last week's call with reporters, Alex Stamos, Facebook's chief security officer, said the company should not be expected to identify or blame specific governments for all the campaigns it detects. Just quickly seeing how much more of this there is, because I don't want to overrun too much. But yeah, I mean, basically these companies by design are doing this, and they're doing this with the blessing and support of a lot of big networks, particularly government ones. Now that it's been established that Facebook is in fact censoring based on values provided by former spooks and other assorted establishment charlatans, let's talk about what this means. There's two major takeaways. First and foremost, the entire push to make arbitrary deplatforming by tech giants the new norm proves the establishment is scared to death. Very powerful folks accustomed to manipulating and shaping the world via narrative creation aren't terrified about what Alex Jones says. They're terrified that it's popular. The establishment, quote, elites are in such denial about the consequences of the world they created, all they can do is spastically attack symptoms. Trump did not divide U.S. society, and Alex Jones didn't cause our widespread and entirely justifiably distrust in the institutions. The status quo system that, via its spectacular failures. Trump's election and Alex Jones's popularity are merely symptoms of an incredibly corrupt and failed status quo paradigm, the stewards of which continually refuse to take a look in the mirror, accept blame for, and reform. I'm trying to see I didn't see what the second option is, but yeah, this guy's predicting that all this is going to backfire. I think the fact that we have been able to make at least 3 different shows out of this out of this one event, effectively, kind of proves that point for anybody in the alt or independent media, as it were.
Well, maybe.
Simply because I don't see it as anything else at the moment from a probabilistic perspective. It's more likely to have a significant impact on
From a probabilistic perspective, most people don't watch Alex Jones, and they'll be totally fine going to YouTube for unboxing videos and watching Spider-Man grind on Elsa. They don't give a shit, dude.
Well, and that's something to keep in mind too, actually, Jeremiah. That's a really important part of this is talking about scale and scale of impact or scale of audience. You know, the United States has over 300 million people in it. And Alex Jones or Facebook or CNN reach, you know, what percentage of that on a daily basis?
Yeah,
No,
I mean, because
it's kind of a dead end point, but scale matters, is what I'm saying.
Well, right, but like it's not a dead end point because the new avenues that it brings up are huge. The only thing that it is there's a big ass brick wall in the way that is the people we scream at about politics. And to be completely frank, this isn't going to change until the average person is actually personally responsible. It's not going to get better. It's just gonna, and that's the point I constantly make. So
yeah, and I don't know that there's much more to say though. Like that is absolutely the brick wall. You know, people who don't know and don't care exist, and they are over 99% of the population. So, you know, we got to wake them up. But how do you do that? How do you go about it? What do you say? What do you do?
They'll start caring when they can't.
Towards it.
You see, they'll start caring when it starts impacting them. That's the point.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
And
it impacts them every single day. You know, it impacts everyone equally. You know, just because we're getting upset about it doesn't mean that it's impacting us and not them.
Well, to a degree, but point. Take for example a non-viewer of Alex Jones, or somebody who dislikes Alex Jones. A non-viewer doesn't really care, and someone who dislikes them is quite happy he's off. Whereas someone who is, and the rest of it, is one who's been disenfranchised. There will be different groups of people who have different vested interests in this, and that's part of the point.
And let me be very specific. If you're upset that Alex Jones is gone, use this opportunity as an opportunity to find better people, like True Stream Media. Go watch every video they put out. They're fantastic people. I cannot recommend them enough. I probably mentioned their name a few hundred times by now because they're that good. They're very good at what they do. But let me just get to this point here, because I just wanted to finish this up by telling people basically go outside. This is something on Activist Post, and it has links to every article that they bring up. But I figured that I'd bring up their 4 key points. This is by B.N. Frank over there. Blinded by the artificial light, part 2. New research determines blue light from screens can lead to macular degeneration and blindness. Jeepers creepers, it was just last month when I wrote an article about how blue light from digital screens, flat screen TVs, fluorescent and LED light bulbs is causing a multitude of biological and environmental problems, including poor eye health. Now research has proven that exposure to blue light causes blindness. Here are excerpts from 4 articles about this. 1. New research shows blue light from electronics leading to blindness. A dark room at the University of Toledo is where researchers have found blue light specifically leads to macular degeneration. Macular degeneration is one of the leading causes of blindness in the U.S. and all around the world, said assistant professor in the UT Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry, Ajit Koratune. I probably mispronounced that. Let me see if I can do that better this time. Kara Unarthane? No, I'm pronouncing, whatever. Ajit. That's right. According to this research, new blue light can make us blind. Eye damage risk from cell phones, laptop screens revealed. It's toxic. Kasun Ratnaiki. I'm mispronouncing these names, whatever. PhD student researcher working in Ajit Cellular Photochemistry Group said in a statement, this is particularly troubling because photoreceptor cells do not regenerate in the eye. When they're dead for good. Chemists discover how blue light from digital devices speeds blindness. No activity is sparked with green, yellow, or red light. The retinal-generated toxicity by blue light is universal. It can kill any cell type. And the fourth item here is blue light from cell phones may be reducing your vision. Damage caused to photoreceptor cells can increase the risk of macular degeneration. It may lead to blurring and reduction of vision in the center of our visual field. This is often referred to as blind spots. Even without the additional damage done by smartphones and other devices, there are already over 11 million Americans suffering from the ocular condition. So I'm going to include everything in the description, but please go check their sources. Don't just believe me. Don't just believe them. Check the sources, but most importantly, go outside. Be, a human. Be a creature that is designed to be a mammal out in the wilderness, have some fresh air, exercise. There are chemicals in the brain that activate when you do light exercise. Like if you take a walk for 15 minutes, you will get chemicals in your brain that make you more creative, that make you a better person, that make you calmer and nicer and generally easier to be around. So, just do that, man. I don't feel good on days when I don't get a walk in. And I can tell you that basically we've been cowed into submission, and one of the submission points is the point at which we refuse to disconnect from our devices. Now, admittedly, when I go for my walks blasting loud, usually noisy or industrial music in my ears, but that's aside from the point. Go the fuck outside. Stop looking at your devices 24/7. They're blinding you in more than metaphorical ways.
Yeah,
Anyway.
I don't think there's much more to add. There's a joke in here, I think, about the drill tweet not logging off, but,
Can I just ask you to send me that? Is there a link to the raw data in the studies?
Yeah, no problem.
Because it's anytime somebody makes a big medical claim that sort of counteracts some basic assumptions of mine, I have to review the data. Because I've always assumed blue light would be safe because the sky is basically blue. You're seeing blue fairly regularly in very large amounts when you look outside, and it tends to make people wake up and do other things like that.
And of course, blue light in that sense is different than blue light in this sense. That's heavily filtered through the atmosphere, whereas this is beamed directly into our face.
True, and it may be a specific frequency or wavelength of light that does the damage.
It's a specific range of frequencies, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, so it may be something that can be easily dealt with for most LED color changing and whatnot, or for any kind of lighting that exists today. If it does cause
macular degeneration.
Yeah, that's the one. That is pretty fucking bad, and it's something that would then need to be tackled as part of IEEE, probably more than anything else, to prevent that from being a long-term problem. Because otherwise, you're just going to keep having the same issues.
Well, do you have anything to say, additionally to say about this, Minark?
I think that more or less, I think you guys have covered anything I could have added to that. The technical side of these discussions is often beyond me.
Gotcha. So basically, we all agree. Go outside, have some exercise, a social life. Don't let the state and the corporate machine cow you into submission and constantly have you chained by a shackle handcuffed to your desk. Always remember that the reason these devices are considered good is because the state can use them as ways to control you. They're not because they're on your side. They're not because they're doing things that you want them to. They're because the state can use them. So, and just a few comments here before we get off. Let me see. Vice is a CIA op. This is from Finian. Dead serious. They were purposefully on the wrong side of the Ukraine conflict. Their purpose is to spread false info and propaganda as usual for the press, but it's way worse for Vice. if they can, or alternatively, and this is about deepfakes, people will stop believing any kind of evidence and just believe what they want. And that's the post-truth thing Bilderberg was discussing. Hey, if Finian responds, if they can fake the Gulf of Tonkin incident, they can fake anything. It's already backfiring with sites like MeWeMind, Steemit. This is on censorship. Yeah, I mean, maybe. I'm not exactly sure that's backfiring. I just think they're getting the people who are into alternative media away from the platform, because the platform is becoming the MSM, and people, like Philip DeFranco, who, are much better news sources than MSN, are becoming the new MSM because people are much more interested in his news than the other news. And so the mainstream is changing. It's not like there is one mainstream, and once you divert from that, you're no longer mainstream. The mainstream is just shifted at this particular point.
It always will, though. I mean, that's the thing. Nothing is static. Everything's evolving.
I didn't say it was, but what I'm saying is that the only people really moving to MeWeMind, Steemit, etc., are people who are interested in that alternative, and that's still not the mainstream. The mainstream is still the mainstream, and until we get a significant disrupting force that isn't Alex Jones, that's not going to change, because they can just discredit it with all these clips of him being screamy. I honestly didn't understand why liberty lovers, or don't understand why liberty lovers are still on Facebook, etc. To troll, I guess. We won't make any progress there and just be hitting our head against the wall. Well, yesterday when I woke up earlier than this, I sent this to a bunch of people on a bunch of platforms, and that's one of the reasons that I'm on Facebook, is because I have close to 5,000 friends over there, and I also have pages with thousands of likes that I can share it to. In some cases, over 100,000. And so, yeah, it might be, a government thing, but so are government roads, and you can use those to drive to anarchist compounds, is all I'm saying. So, and Finian says also work on your primitive skills, and you may need them in the future going outside-wise. Yes, and Danielle says gardening is good. Gardening is good. But yeah, I mean, that's part of it. Decentralize your mind. Decentralize your life. Don't allow the state to cow you into submission, being attached to this screen that's blinding you in more than one way, including metaphorical. Anyway, I think that I think the people here are pretty much in accord there. So if that's the case, then I'll wrap it up. Y'all ready to wrap?
Yep.
Yeah, I think I'm good to go here.
All right, and everybody, you'll be able to see this guy regularly here. I'm going to send it to a bunch of people who follow him so that they can get their news daily from a source they trust. Anyway, this has been Bad Morning News. Bad morning to y'all. Smash the state and fuck the system.
Have a bad morning.